Fog clung to the iron gates of Highgate Cemetery, curling through the Gothic arches like restless smoke. The air was sharp, tasting faintly of rain and iron. For most, this place was just a decaying relic of London's past. Crumbling angels, ivy-choked tombs, and the uneasy silence of the dead. But for Eleanor Cross, it was the beginning of her next documentary, and, unknowingly, the unraveling of her own history. Eleanor had made a name for herself as the collector of ghosts, a filmmaker who hunted the line between history and haunting. Her documentaries filled late-night television slots and streaming queues, each one blurring fact and superstition. Yet beneath her professional poise was a wound that had never healed: the disappearance of her mother, Margaret Cross, a paranormal researcher who vanished 10 years ago during a Halloween investigation much like this one. She arrived at Highgate just before dusk, her breath misting as she set up her camera equipment. The last light of the day bled through the trees, casting skeletal shadows across the marble tombs. Her cameraman joked nervously about the Highgate vampire, but Eleanor barely smiled. She wasn't there for myths. She was searching for truth. As night fell, the cemetery transformed. The wind sighed through the crypt doors. Dead leaves rattled like whispers. Eleanor spoke into her recorder. Highgate Cemetery, October 31st. Temperature dropping. EMF fluctuations around the circle of Lebanon. Testing for anomalies. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. Hours passed. They filmed the fog rolling through the mausoleums, the candlelit angels staring blankly into eternity. Then, just as Eleanor leaned close to a weathered tombstone, her microphone caught something. A faint, drawn-out breath. A whisper. At first, she thought it was her assistant, but he had frozen in place, staring at her monitor. Eleanor. Her name, spoken softly, almost lovingly. The sound was fragile, stretched thin as if it had crossed not meters, but centuries. Eleanor's heart stopped. Her mother had whispered her name like that. That same tone, that same quiver, the night before she disappeared. She scanned the darkness, flashlight trembling. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice cracking. Only silence answered. The wind howled through the cedars, carrying a scent of damp earth and something older, something sweet and rotting. They packed up quickly after that. The chill had become unbearable. But when Eleanor reviewed the audio back at her hotel, she found the moment, that strange distortion of breath. She replayed it again and again, isolating the sound until it formed words. The whisper grew clearer, layered with echoes, her mother's voice, unmistakable, murmuring through static. "Find the seventh seal." Eleanor stared at the recorder, her reflection flickering in the laptop screen. Behind her, the hotel lights dimmed for just a second, long enough for her camera, still running on its tripod, to pick up something moving in the dark corner of the room. Something shaped like a woman. The Tomb of Shadows. The Paris air felt heavy, perfumed with decay and incense, a scent that clung to Eleanor's clothes long after she stepped through the gates of Père Lachaise Cemetery. The world's most visited graveyard sprawled before her like a city of the dead. Cobblestone paths winding through mausoleums, iron gates whispering as they swayed in the wind, and crows perched like sentinels on weathered angels. Eleanor adjusted her camera, her expression calm, but her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. The voice from Highgate haunted her recordings. Every playback carried that same static hum, and beneath it, faintly, her mother's whisper. "Find the seventh seal." She'd told herself it was interference, a trick of the equipment, but deep down, she knew better. Now, in Paris, her search took on new urgency. Highgate had left her shaken, not because she believed in ghosts, but because the evidence was too clear. Someone, or something, was reaching out. Her first stop was a marble crypt near the grave of Oscar Wilde, where rumors spoke of the shifting tomb. Locals claimed that the name carved into its stone changed every All Hallows Eve. Eleanor brushed her hand over the inscription. The letters were worn, but beneath them, she could feel something etched deeper, hidden under centuries of grime. A pattern. She took out her small brush, cleaning the surface. The shape revealed itself. A circle with 7 intersecting lines, identical to the faint carving she'd noticed on a tomb in Highgate. She froze. "Looking for someone, mademoiselle?" The voice came from behind her, deep, accented, yet strangely familiar. Turning, Eleanor saw a man standing in the half-light, tall, dressed in a charcoal coat, eyes the color of storm clouds. He introduced himself as Lucien Moreau, a historian who guided researchers through the cemetery's less-known sections. His manner was polite but guarded, as though he already knew why she was there. When she mentioned the markings, his demeanor changed. "Those are not decorations," he said quietly. "They are coordinates. Pieces of a map." Eleanor frowned. "A map to what?" Lucien smiled faintly. "That depends on who you ask. Some believe it points to the resting place of angels. Others, to the Gate of Souls." He led her deeper into the cemetery, through paths overgrown with moss and ivy, until they reached a secluded crypt with its door ajar. The air inside was still and cold. Dust floated in beams of faint light that pierced through cracks in the stone ceiling. Lucien's lantern illuminated the walls, every surface carved with the same sigil, the circle and its 7 rays, repeating endlessly like a ritualistic chant in stone. "They appear in cemeteries across continents," Lucien murmured. "Always 7, always hidden in plain sight." As he spoke, a gust of wind swept through the crypt, extinguishing his lantern. For a moment, the darkness seemed alive, shifting, breathing. Eleanor's camera light flickered. In the brief flashes, she thought she saw faces pressed into the stone, silent, screaming. Then came the sound. Not footsteps, not wind, a dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across marble. Lucien tensed. Eleanor raised her camera. From the back of the crypt, a coffin began to move, inch by inch, scraping against the floor. "This can't be real," she whispered. Lucien grabbed her arm. "Don't look directly at it." But she did. The coffin lid creaked open, slow as a breath. Inside, no body, only a polished mirror, old, cracked, and glimmering in the camera light. And in that reflection, Eleanor didn't see herself. She saw a woman standing behind her, half shrouded in shadow. Her mother. Eleanor spun around. Nothing there. When she turned back, the mirror was fogged over, but a message had appeared across its surface, drawn as if by unseen hands. "You've already begun. The Queen of the Dead." The air in New Orleans was thick with heat. Jazz drifted from distant streets, mingling with the hum of insects and the faint, sweet rod of magnolias. For the living, it was the season of masquerades and spirits. But for Eleanor Cross, it was another step toward the truth. Her new documentary segment focused on St. Louis Cemetery No.1, the resting place of the legendary voodoo queen, Marie Laveau. The place felt alive. Rows of whitewashed tombs shimmered under the gaslight, and the pathways pulsed with candles, rum offerings, and the scent of sage. Visitors came daily to leave offerings, scratching 3XS into Laveau's tomb for luck, or to beg her for favors in whispers they didn't mean to believe. Eleanor moved through the labyrinth of stone, filming her surroundings, her camera's red light blinking like a heartbeat. She had been restless since Paris. The mirror, the voice, the symbols. Every new clue pulled her further from logic and closer to something ancient that she didn't understand. When she reached Laveau's tomb, she found a small crowd gathered in reverence. A woman draped in a crimson shawl was leading a quiet prayer. Her eyes flicked to Eleanor as she filmed, not with annoyance, but recognition. After the crowd dispersed, the woman approached her. "You shouldn't film here at night," she said softly, her accent musical, her tone grave. "When the veil thins, the queen chooses who may see her. Not everyone survives the sight." Eleanor, trying to sound composed, replied, "I'm not here to disturb anyone. I'm documenting history." The woman smiled faintly. "Then you're already part of it." Before Eleanor could respond, the woman pressed something into her hand, a wax doll bound with red thread, and disappeared into the shadows. That night, the city roared with life outside her hotel window, but Eleanor couldn't sleep. She reviewed her footage, frame by frame. At first, everything seemed normal. Then she noticed a flicker behind one of the tombs. A silhouette, a woman in white, walking against the wind, her veil trailing like smoke. She paused the video, zoomed in. The face, though half obscured, made her blood run cold. It looked like her mother. She tried to shake it off. Hallucination, exhaustion, the same excuses she'd been repeating since Highgate. But when she looked down, she saw wax residue smeared across her fingers. The doll, the one the woman had given her, was gone. The next morning, Eleanor's crew failed to show. Their hotel rooms were empty, cameras missing. Only their car remained, doors unlocked, radio still playing static. She returned to the cemetery alone. The sun was low, the air thick with mist. As she moved deeper between the tombs, she began to hear it, the faint rhythm of chanting. Her recorder clicked on by itself. A trail of wax dolls led her forward, each one more grotesque than the last. Faces twisted as if mid-scream. They ended at Marie Laveau's tomb. An offering had been freshly placed there, a locket, tarnished and familiar. Eleanor's initials were engraved on the back. Her breath caught. She hadn't worn that locket since she was a child. Her mother had given it to her the night before she disappeared. Lightning flashed. The air shifted. The chanting stopped. Eleanor raised her camera and froze. Behind her, reflected in the tomb's polished marble, stood a woman draped in white lace, eyes glowing like embers. The figure leaned close, whispering so softly it seemed to come from inside Eleanor's own mind. "You've been here before." Eleanor spun around. The space behind her was empty, only candlelight and rain. But when she turned back, her camera had stopped recording. The battery icon blinked red, dead, though it had been fully charged. The Cemetery of Whispers, St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, New Orleans. The air in New Orleans felt heavier than anywhere else Eleanor had been, thick with humidity, jazz, and something ancient that pulsed beneath the cobblestones. The streets of the French Quarter wound like veins, leading her toward the legendary St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, home of the voodoo queen herself, Marie Laveau. As she passed through the iron gates, the temperature dropped. Candles flickered in glass jars, some still warm from the hands that left them. The air smelled of rum, incense, and river water. Locals called it the City of the Dead. Rows of whitewashed tombs built above ground, their marble surfaces scrawled with cryptic red X's and the names of those who dared ask Laveau for favors. Eleanor moved cautiously, her camera rolling, her voice calm, though her pulse raced. "They say if you leave an offering at her tomb and draw 3 X's, she might grant your wish," she whispered. "But you have to return to say thank you, or she'll come to collect it herself." A wind stirred, hot, sudden, alive. From somewhere deeper in the maze of tombs came the faint sound of chanting. A woman's voice, low and rhythmic, weaving through the walls like smoke. Eleanor followed the sound, her lantern casting long, trembling shadows across cracked stone. When she reached Marie Laveau's tomb, it was covered in offerings, beads, coins, half-burned candles, and a rosary made of teeth. The X's were fresh, glowing faintly under the moonlight. She lifted her camera, focusing on a carved sigil she hadn't seen before, an eye surrounded by 7 small crosses. Then she froze. The same symbol had been etched into a grave back in Highgate. She reached out, fingertips brushing the stone, and the chanting stopped. Silence pressed in. Then, from behind her, a voice whispered in perfect French, "You shouldn't have connected them." Eleanor spun around. No one was there. Her lantern sputtered, then went out completely. In the darkness, a figure moved, the outline of a woman in a white dress, eyes glowing faintly red, her face hidden beneath a black veil. Eleanor stumbled backward, nearly dropping her camera. The woman lifted a hand, and Eleanor felt her throat tighten, not from fear, but recognition. The apparition's wrist bore the same sigil, carved into flesh like a scar. Then, with a hiss like air escaping a tomb, the figure vanished. The candles flared back to life. Eleanor looked down. The dirt beneath her feet had shifted, forming the faint outline of a map, connecting the graves she'd already visited. For the first time, she understood. She wasn't just documenting hauntings. She was being led, and whatever was guiding her knew exactly where she would go next. The Whispering Bones. Salem's Charter Street Cemetery was silent in a way that made the hair on Eleanor's arms stand on end. The town, famous for its dark past, smelled faintly of wood smoke and decaying leaves. Even in daylight, the fog seemed unwilling to lift, clinging to the moss-covered stones like a living shroud. Eleanor stepped carefully between the crooked tombstones, her boots crunching over cracked slate. The whispers began almost immediately, soft, nearly imperceptible, rising from the soil itself. She paused, holding her microphone near the ground. "Did you hear that?" her cameraman whispered. Eleanor nodded. She had heard it. though it wasn't words in any language she recognized. It was a rhythm, a subtle rise and fall, almost like breathing. She pressed her recorder closer to the earth, and the pattern grew louder. When she reversed the audio, the static revealed a voice chanting in Latin. Tabula surgit. Tabula surgit. Her blood ran cold. She translated quickly in her mind. The map awakens. The carvings she had seen in Highgate and Père Lachaise were no longer isolated. They were part of something vast, a ritual etched across continents. She bent closer to examine a weathered headstone. The stone beneath her fingers seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. The fog thickened, swirling around her boots. Eleanor felt the ground shift slightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough to make her stumble. Then, with a deep groan like the moaning of the earth itself, the soil split. A jagged crack ran across the cemetery, dark and hungry. Within the opening, she saw it, an ancient symbol, glowing faintly as though etched in bone. Its design was familiar, the same sigils from Highgate, Paris, and New Orleans. But here, the symbol carried something more, a missing piece. A segment that seemed to connect all the others into a map, a puzzle that had been waiting centuries to be completed. Eleanor reached out, trembling, to touch it. The instant her fingers brushed the glowing lines, a shiver ran through her entire body. Whispers became voices, voices became screams, and for a heartbeat, she felt hundreds of unseen eyes on her, watching, judging, remembering. The cemetery seemed to breathe. Roots and dirt twisted beneath the tombs, hinting at hidden graves and secrets that had been buried and forgotten for centuries. This isn't just a map, Eleanor murmured to herself. It's a key, and for the first time, she realized that the haunted graveyards she had visited were not isolated tragedies. They were all connected, points in a ritual spanning the globe, activated by those who dared step on his sacred ground. The fifth graveyard. The air in Japan was different, crisp, scented with wet stone and pine, tinged with the faint metallic smell of river water. Eleanor stood at the edge of Okiku's well, a centuries-old burial site in Hokkaido, its wooden railings warped by rain and age. The legend was simple yet haunting. A servant girl named Okiku had been betrayed, murdered, and thrown into the well, her spirit trapped for eternity. Eleanor adjusted her camera, breath visible in the chilly night air. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but she had come too far. The previous graveyards, the symbols, the whispers of her mother, all of it pointed here. She could feel the energy in the earth, vibrating beneath her boots, calling her forward. The well gaped like a black mouth. Its water shimmered unnaturally in the moonlight, reflecting stars that weren't in the sky. As Eleanor leaned over the edge, she heard it first, a soft, sorrowful singing. At first, she thought it was the wind. Then, the melody became words, delicate, precise, carrying the pain of centuries. Eleanor. Her name, clear as a bell, carried on the water's surface. She staggered back, heart racing. A faint light emerged from the well, and with it, visions. The past unfolded before her eyes. Okiku being betrayed, her screams swallowed by the darkness, her final gaze rising toward the moon. And then the visions shifted, showing Eleanor's mother, Margaret Cross, standing beside the well decades ago, her expression grave, holding a small book of rituals. Eleanor's fingers brushed the edge of a moss-covered stone. The instant she touched it, visions pierced her mind. Her mother's death replayed, but this time, her eyes opened, staring directly into Eleanor's soul. Panic surged. Run. The word wasn't spoken aloud. It was a movement, a vibration inside Eleanor's chest, a message that skipped past sound and lodged itself in her bones. Her camera shook in her hands. The whispers from the previous graveyards now filled her ears in overlapping waves, all chanting, all pleading, all warning. The sigils burned faintly onto her skin, the same as the symbols she had found across Europe and the Americas. The energy around her thickened, shadows twisted, and the well itself seemed to pulse, drawing her closer. Eleanor stumbled, fighting the compulsion, trying to step back. Every instinct screamed escape, yet every heartbeat pushed her forward. Then, from the black water, a figure rose, pale, dripping, hair slick against her face. Okiku's ghost, eyes hollow and infinite. reached toward Eleanor, fingers outstretched. Eleanor gasped, raising her camera to capture it. But the ghost spoke, not in words, but in thought. "The Watcher comes. She is the key." The well's water rippled violently. Eleanor's vision blurred. And through it all, her mother's gaze never left her, both pleading and commanding. The dead remember. The chill of Prague's old Jewish cemetery bit through Eleanor's coat as she entered the maze of tombstones, leaning this way and that, as if the gravestones themselves were watching her every step. She moved cautiously, camera in hand, her breath fogging the air, heartbeat echoing in the stillness. Lucien had vanished without a trace days ago. No note, no warning, no explanation. Only his journal left on the hotel bed, its leather cover worn, its pages filled with meticulous sketches of the sigils Eleanor had now seen across continents. Her skin tingled where the symbols seemed to have burned themselves onto her arms, faintly glowing in the dim twilight. The pages of Lucien's journal detailed not just the ritual, but something far more personal. Margins filled with cryptic warnings, sketches of cemeteries, and a name Eleanor knew instinctively: her mother. A sudden wind swept through the cemetery, scattering dry leaves across cracked stones. Eleanor shivered and pressed the journal to her chest. The world around her seemed to warp, shadows stretching impossibly long, whispers curling through the tombs in a language she almost understood. Then she saw her. A figure emerged, ethereal and glowing faintly, hovering above the graves. Eleanor's knees buckled. It was her mother, Margaret Cross, unchanged by the years, eyes holding sorrow and urgency. "Eleanor." Margaret's voice was soft but commanding, echoing unnaturally through the cemetery. "You were born during a failed ritual. You are not just an observer. You are the key. The final one." Eleanor's mind reeled. Every graveyard, every sigil, every whisper, it had led here, to her. She had thought her mother was gone, a victim, a memory. Now she realized. Her disappearance had been deliberate, a part of a plan too vast to comprehend. I don't understand," Eleanor stammered, shaking. "Why me?" Margaret's form drifted closer, her hand almost brushing Eleanor's cheek. "The Watcher between worlds, the ritual, it chose you. You were always meant to awaken the gates. You cannot run from this. You are the bridge between the living and the dead." The ground trembled beneath Eleanor's feet. Tombstones groaned, their inscriptions shimmering like wet ink in the dim light. A low hum filled the air, vibrating in her chest, syncing with her pulse. The graves themselves seemed to remember her presence, ancient energy thrumming through the soil. Her vision blurred. Spirits flickered at the edge of her sight, silent but attentive. The journal fell from her hands as her mother's voice faded into a whisper. "Remember who you are, before the world forgets." The dead remember. Prague's old Jewish cemetery stretched before Eleanor like a city of shadows. Cracked cobblestones wound between tombs stacked like ancient teeth, leaning precariously toward one another. Fog seeped through the narrow alleys, carrying whispers that seemed almost familiar. Eleanor's boots crunched against the stones, each step echoing like a drumbeat calling her closer to the inevitable. Lucien had disappeared days ago. No explanation, no trace. Only his journal, left behind in the hotel, its pages filled with cryptic sketches and notes. Eleanor's eyes traced the sigils carefully drawn in the margins. The same symbols burned faintly into her skin, glowing with a light she couldn't explain. She shivered. The air felt alive. Every tomb seemed to breathe, exhaling shadows that twisted at the edges of her vision. Then she saw her, hovering above the graves, ethereal, untouched by time. Her mother, Margaret Cross, eyes filled with sorrow and urgency, a presence both comforting and terrifying. "Eleanor," her mother's voice whispered, both inside Eleanor's mind and in the cold Prague air. "You were born during a failed ritual. You are not merely investigating. You are the final key." Eleanor stumbled backward, the journal slipping from her fingers. "But why me? Her words faltered. "I'm not special." Margaret's form drifted closer, a hand extending toward Eleanor's face, shimmering like mist over marble. "The Watcher between worlds, the ritual, it chose you long before you understood. Every graveyard, every symbol, every whisper, it led to you. You are the bridge between the living and the dead." The ground trembled beneath Eleanor. The tombstones groaned, inscriptions glowing faintly, as if remembering centuries of forgotten energy. Whispers rose into a crescendo, overlapping in languages long dead. Her heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of the cemetery itself, the earth vibrating through her chest. Her vision blurred. Spirits flickered at the edge of her sight, shadows of those buried, watching, waiting. The journal slipped from her hands as the sigils on her arms burned brighter, spreading across her skin in intricate patterns, almost alive. "Remember who you are," her mother's voice echoed, fading like mist. "Before the world forgets." The seventh seal. Eleanor awoke to the scent of candles and marigolds, the flickering light of thousands of flames casting shadows across the streets of Panteon de Bullen in Mexico. Dia de los Muertos had transformed the cemetery into a cathedral of the dead, spirals of candles, altars overflowing with offerings, and the quiet hum of lives once lived. The air thrummed with energy. She could feel it in her bones, in the pulse of her blood, in the faint warmth of the sigils etched into her skin. They glowed softly, illuminating intricate patterns that linked her to graveyards she had visited across the globe. All around her, the living and the dead gathered, not by choice, but by the pull of a force older than memory. Ghosts drifted through the rows of tombs, children laughing and crying at the edges of perception, spirits of long-forgotten souls pressing close to the barriers of the veil. Eleanor raised her camera, trembling. This was no longer a documentary. She could feel the ritual awakening, as if the entire world were a stage and she the unwilling centerpiece. Lucien appeared beside her, calm and impossibly composed. "The seventh seal," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "It is not just a location. It is the point where all graveyards converge, where the map completes itself, and it is you who completes it." Eleanor's mind reeled. Every cemetery, every sigil, every whisper, it had all led to this. Her fingers traced the glowing marks on her arms, feeling the energy course through her like electricity. The ground beneath her shivered. Candles flickered, forming spirals around her. The sigils pulsed in sync, connecting continents, oceans, and centuries of haunted earth into one colossal ritual map. The air vibrated with a low chant, the chorus of the dead, rising, converging, demanding. A voice whispered inside her mind, not her mother's, not Lucien's. Her own voice, distorted, echoing. "It's time to open the gate." Eleanor stumbled, clutching her head. She tried to resist, tried to deny what she had become, but the ritual's pull was irresistible. The dead pressed closer, some reaching for her hands, some hovering above the altars, their eyes imploring, accusing. Lucien's gaze met hers. "You cannot stop this," he said, and for the first time, Eleanor noticed something strange. The glow in his eyes was no longer human. He had transcended, become part of the ritual himself. The candle's light intensified, spiraling faster, casting every tomb, every spirit, every sigil into stark relief. Eleanor realized she was standing at the center of a global convergence, the axis around which the dead would rise. The night of the rising veil. Across the globe, graveyards trembled as if the earth itself were awakening. Tombstones shuddered, iron gates groaned, and the whispers Eleanor had followed for so long became a chorus of the dead, rising in unison. The ritual was no longer abstract. It was alive, breathing through the soil, the stones, and the spirits themselves. Eleanor stood at the center of the chaos in Panteon de Bullen, the sigils on her arms glowing fiercely, mapping connections to cemeteries from London to Salem, from Prague to Japan. The air vibrated, thick with energy, and she could feel the veil between life and death thinning to nothing. And then he appeared. Lucien, but not as she had known him. His form shimmered with an unnatural light, eyes glowing like molten silver. Shadows twisted around him, bending and coiling, as if the darkness itself recognized him as master. "Eleanor," he said, voice calm but resonant with power beyond human understanding. "It is time you understood the truth." Her heart raced. "Lucien, what are you?" He smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "I have been dead for over a century, reborn through the ritual, tethered to the watcher between worlds. I am its instrument, and now, so are you." Eleanor stumbled backward. The dead around her stirred, rising slowly, drawn by the energy her sigils radiated. They were restless, spectral forms that had waited for centuries, now moving with purpose. "You must finish the ritual, Eleanor," Lucian continued, "or perish with the rest of humanity." Her hands trembled as she raised the camera to record, to preserve herself in reality, but the screen flickered. Instead of her perspective, it showed something impossible, a live feed of her own grave, freshly dug, waiting for her. The earth was open, dark, and endless. Panic surged. This can't be real," she whispered, voice breaking. Lucian's gaze softened for a fraction of a second. "Reality is irrelevant now. The veil rises tonight, and it is your choices that will shape what remains of the world." The dead pressed closer, spectral hands reaching, faces pleading and accusing. The ground vibrated violently beneath her. Her own heartbeat echoed in her ears, mingling with a chorus of unseen voices chanting in ancient tongues. Eleanor's mind raced. She could flee, destroy the footage, deny the ritual, but the pull was overwhelming. Every instinct, every memory, every whisper of her mother's voice converged on a single terrifying truth. She could not escape. The final graveyard. Halloween night draped the world in a thick, living darkness. Eleanor's journey had led her across continents, through fog, shadows, and whispers, and now the ritual had reached its apex. The map of haunted graveyards, etched into her skin and mind, pulsed with energy, pointing to a place that existed only when all others aligned, the final graveyard. She stepped through the mists and found herself in a cemetery that should not exist, a mirror of every graveyard she had visited, stitched together from memory and death. Tombstones reflected symbols she had seen in Highgate, Père Lachaise, Salem, and Japan. Candles flickered along winding paths, casting long shadows that twisted like living things. Her mother appeared, luminous and frail, hovering above the earth. Margaret's eyes held both love and sorrow. "Eleanor, this is your choice," her mother whispered. "Seal the gate, and you vanish with it, or complete the ritual and join the dead, immortal among them." The dead were everywhere, rising, watching, waiting. Lucian appeared too, now fully revealed as the original watcher, a being older than memory, his gaze fixed upon Eleanor. She took a trembling step forward. The sigils burned bright along her arms, linking every graveyard in one colossal web. The world held its breath. "You are the key," the whispers said. Eleanor's mind raced. The faces of the spirits, her mother's pleading eyes, the knowledge of what would come if she faltered. She could feel the veil thinning, reality fraying at its edges. Every heartbeat echoed like a drum of inevitability. And then, with a deep, shuddering breath, she chose. She raised her hands, tracing the sigils in reverse, chanting the words she had learned along the way. A flash of light erupted. The spirits froze mid-motion. The ground trembled violently, then stilled. The veil sealed. The final graveyard began to dissolve into mist, along with Eleanor herself. For a heartbeat, the world was silent. Then, a computer screen flickered to life. A new documentary was uploading. The most haunted graveyards to visit on Halloween. In the reflection of the screen, a woman smiled, unmistakably Eleanor. Alive, yet altered, her eyes holding secrets no mortal should bear. The screen blinked, the upload completed. Outside, the wind whispered through unseen tombstones, carrying the faint EC.